Alright, this is our first ride in the indoor arena, our 8th ride total, and this was almost a week ago, so hopefully I'll remember what we did. I do remember that the main theme of this ride was that he had more energy in this indoor arena. He is not as relaxed in this indoor arena, so it's a good example of what I do in that case when the horse has a little bit too much forward energy, which is not usually his case outside. In most of my other videos with Drifter, he's a little on the slow side, on the pokey side, and I have to be asking him to step up and move forward, but this ride was different in that regard. So I think it's a good example of what I do in the opposite case. I'm just doing my typical, I always start the same way, so I make him bend his neck both ways, and he can't walk off until I ask him to. If he does walk off, then I let him take a few steps, and then I pull his head back around. Sometimes I make him move around in a forehand turn, just to make it a little bit more uncomfortable for him, make his mistake more uncomfortable. All right. So I'm just showing him kind of like what we did the first time we rode in the outdoor arena. I'm just walking him around and showing him, you know, all the sights, all the new sights. I'm letting him stop and take a look and put his head above the rail. Because similar to the outdoor arena, I'd rather he spook now at the walk than when we're trotting or loping and he decides that something is all of a sudden scary. So I would rather him figure it out now and we can work through it now calmly at the walk than when we're trying to do something else. You just got a nice shot of how filthy he is. You might be able to hear it's raining pretty hard. It was raining pretty hard this day, and he did have a blanket on for a while, and then he and his pasture mate were playing and ripped it, and anyway, he's now blanketless in the rain and very muddy, and there was nothing short of giving him a bath that I could do to get him any more cleaned up than he is in this video. So I'm still just walking him down the rail, just making sure he has a chance to see everything. And then coming up here, you're gonna see the first example of him having too much energy, breaking into a trot. And what you'll see me do here in just a few seconds is I'm going to pull him around into kind of a one rein stop. And I think I also ask him to move his hind around, which I do a lot of forehand turns on the ground. I haven't really worked on that in the saddle. So you can see he gets a little confused. So right there, he kind of broke gait. So I pulled him around into a tight circle, and I'm asking him to move his hind around. Or maybe I just pulled him into a circle. But coming up here, he'll do it again, and I do ask him to move his hind around in a forehand turn. You'll get a better shot of it. We get closer to the camera. He's just, I guess, excited about being in this new space. So I didn't ask for that jog, so he has to do something harder or more uncomfortable, which is spinning in a tight circle, and ideally doing a forehand turn. So I'm using my inside leg, and it's kind of back behind the cinch, and I'm bumping him over, and I only release when I feel a good crossover in the back. So again, that's probably like the first time I've really asked him for a forehand turn in the saddle. So it wasn't like a perfectly beautiful forehand turn, and that's okay. The point is that I made it harder for him to make the mistake that he did. I think most horses don't voluntarily spin around in a tight circle. And he wanted to trot, I did not, so I made him do what he didn't want to do, which is spin around in a tight circle. And there you see it again. So he broke gait into the trot, and I'm asking for that hind to come around, and he's getting it a little bit better. He's crossing over in the back. Again, the forehand turn is kind of like a bonus, like teaching him to disengage his hind is kind of a bonus, but as long as you do something that's not fun for them, as a quote-unquote kind of punishment for breaking into a trot, that's the whole idea, is just make the right thing easy. So the right thing to do is just to walk calmly, and the wrong thing to do is to break gait into the trot. So make the right thing easy and the wrong thing hard. So breaking into the trot is going to result in spinning in a tight circle, which is hard for them, or at least more effort than walking calmly. All right, you'll see another strategy I use coming up here when I just feel they have more energy than I would like, or when I feel like they might want to break gait, and so I'm trying to prevent that, or if I just feel like they're kind of distracted and they need to pay attention to me. I just turned him, and I'm gonna turn him again, and the reason I'm doing that is just to kind of like break their momentum and get his mind on me. So that's another strategy when they're kind of like excited and going too fast. Like make them, the phrase you'll hear a lot is make them move their feet, which just means like make them do something that requires them to think and pay attention to you. And that can be any number of things, but right now, in that instance, it was just making him turn some 90-degree corners. So here I did ask for the trot, but then he broke into the lope. Now, what I was trying to do is spin him, like get him out of the lope and spin him in a tight circle. He, again, doesn't really know. We haven't practiced that. We haven't practiced forehand turns, so he just ended up loping a really tight circle, which honestly, I didn't fight that because, again, to my point earlier, as long as you make the quote-unquote punishment more difficult for them or not fun, not enjoyable, it's going to have the same effect. So I made him lope in this really tight circle, which is not fun for him. You can see right now he's going to start tossing his head. He's like, this is annoying. And then he breaks gait. And I actually reward him for breaking down to the trot because that's what I wanted in the first place. So I kind of took the pressure off, gave him back his head, and kind of let him relax into a bigger circle. Now, you could have used a different strategy there. You could have kept him loping until you asked him to slow down, but the whole point of doing that was I wanted him to recognize the trot is all I wanted to begin with. So once he decided to slow down and get back into the trot, that's when I decided to reward him. So you're going to see me use my other strategy, the one I just talked about right here. So I could feel him, trotting pretty fast, wanting to break gait again. And so I just started making him, quote unquote, move his feet. I started making him turn tight circles and figure eights and just like get his mind on me and not thinking about running free around the arena. So a couple strategies. There's not like a right or wrong, and as you can see, I use multiple strategies. If I kind of want to get ahead of things and prevent them from breaking gate in the first place, like if I feel that they're going to, I might start moving their feet. But if I don't get ahead of it and they break gate, that's when I kind of spin them, and I tend to spin them in tighter circles. But again, just different strategies, not right or wrong, just different tools that you can use. And now he's focused a little bit better on me. He is kind of settled down into a trot and listening to my cues for turning. So by this point, I've just been trotting him a lot, and he's kind of settled into that and is feeling more relaxed, which is what I'm looking for. So sometimes, just depending on the day, it takes a lot of trotting to get to that point. Other times it doesn't. But I'm going to reward him by letting him come down to a walk here. Alright, so I've skipped ahead to some stopping and backing, which I think this was my first time trying to work on this with him in the saddle. And the way I teach the back is I just shorten my reins, set my hands, and kind of sit back and ask for, pull back gently with my hands. Every time he takes a step back, I release my hands. If he doesn't take a step back, if he gets stuck, there's a couple things you can do. I first will bump my legs on him, and when I originally learned that, it made sense to me because if you think about, like, if your hands and your reins and the bridle are like a wall, like they're just kind of set, and then you start bumping your legs on them, if they can't go forward against that wall of the bridle, they have to go backwards. And it actually does work. So I just set my hands. I don't get aggressive. I don't start pulling more or anything. I just set them, and then if they don't back up, I bump. The other thing you can do if they don't back, even with a little bit of leg, you can do, I don't show it here, but I've used it with a different horse that just hated backing. You kind of like ask for lateral flexion of the neck and kind of get them to move their feet that way. Maybe I'll show it in a future video, but there's a number of strategies. Thankfully, Drifter is picking up the back pretty nicely, so I didn't have to use that other one. But I do kind of progress this over time. So this being my first time practicing it with him, I'm just asking for one step back and then I release. But in future rides, I'll ask for 2 steps backing and then I'll release, and then so on and so forth. So you just keep asking for more before you give that release, and then pretty soon they'll be backing up nicely, however long you want them to. So this part just demonstrates that even after all that good trotting we did earlier and how calm he was with the backing, horses are horses, and here he gets excited again. You might even hear him whinny a little bit. At this point, there's a lot happening out at the barn. People are like coming and going. Horses are being walked around, so he is not as focused on me anymore. And again, I just handle that by making him move his feet. So I'm doing smaller circles, making him turn and think and not just kind of fly around the ring with his head up. So for the next few minutes, I just keep doing kind of figure eights and small circles one way or the other. I introduce, it's almost a suppling, well, it is a suppling exercise. I didn't purposely do it for that reason today, but it's just smaller circles where you have them tip their nose to the inside and kind of round their body along the line of that circle. I haven't really taught him that, so he's not showing a good example of it, but it's another tool that you can use when they're kind of distracted or not listening. Okay, so we're about to do a little bit more stopping and backing again, and I just threw this in here because it demonstrates how I will come back to something later in the ride that I have introduced to them earlier in the ride, especially if it's something new. Because, the first time I introduce it, we do it a few times, they seem to get the hang of it, and then I let their brain kind of rest and do something else. But later in the ride, if it feels like a good opportunity, I'll reintroduce it just to kind of solidify it in their brain. I think of it like in the adult learning world, we call it spaced repetition. So this is spaced repetition for Drifter and his backing. You can see he has a tendency to turn his head to one side when I'm asking for the back, or when I'm asking for the stop or the back. And I think that's mainly because I first taught him to stop by doing the one range stops, I call them the emergency stops. So it doesn't bother me that much that he is doing that. It makes sense to me why he's doing that, and I don't get after him for it. I just am teaching him a different way to stop. Okay, so this next part is the bending around a circle suppling exercise that I introduced earlier, but this time I'm focusing a little bit more on it. I'm a little bit more intentional on making him do it correctly. Again, this is like one of the first times this is the first day that I did it with him, so he's still new to it, but essentially you're wanting the horse to curve around your inside leg as you use your outside leg to kind of keep the forward motion going, and you want them to quote unquote follow their nose around that tight circle, and you want a nice bend in their neck and their body, and ideally a little break at the pole. So this is the first step to introducing collection, is working on suppleness, and this is one of the best exercises to do that. So working on lateral flexion of that pole and that neck, which comes more naturally to the horse, but eventually when we want to start working on actually collecting along a straightaway, this will be like the building block to that. So you start out doing it either direction and getting them used to bending around a circle and breaking at their pole, and then you eventually kind of straighten that out to where they're bending at the pole and giving you nice collection along a straight line. So we're not there yet. We're far from really focusing on collection, but this is one of the building blocks to getting there. And it's one of my absolute favorite like core drills, core exercises. One of the first ones I learned when I was pretty young. And I think it's pretty standard. Like, I think a lot of people use a version of this. There's different cues you can use, and I've been taught different things. But the main points are to ask for that bend with your inside rein, and when you feel a nice give, you want to reward that with a subsequent release, and then you ask again. So you're constantly kind of asking, releasing, so pulling the inside rein, releasing, pulling, releasing. And then in the meantime, you also want to keep the forward motion. So horses often, when they first learn this, they tend to slow down and even sometimes stop or kind of do a haunch turn sort of thing. And that's not really what we want. We really want that forward motion to keep going. So you want to bump with your outside leg if you need to. So you might wonder why I'm using my outside leg to bump and keep the forward motion, because this kind of goes against what I've talked about in previous videos about the cruise control method, in which I don't want to have to babysit them to keep them in the correct gait. But this is a different exercise entirely. The cruise control method doesn't really apply here. So if you need to bump with the outside leg to keep that forward motion going, this is an appropriate time to do so. The other thing I'll say about this is sometimes horses have a tendency to brace against that inside rein when you're asking them to curve around the circle. And, you know, I might be a little bit lenient about that at first as they're just learning this, but in general, I try to correct that pretty quickly. So if they're really bracing against the bridle, I'll give a couple harsh bumps until they give nicely to me, because I want to nip that in the bud. I don't want them to learn that it's okay to brace when I ask for a give. And then finally, I usually ask for one direction, and once I feel like they're kind of going around nicely in one direction, I'll let them straighten out and just kind of relax for a few strides, and then I'll ask for the other direction. All right, so we're gonna lope here shortly, but I left this part in. This is a lot more trotting. I do more figure eights and whatnot. I left it in because, you know, it's not very fun to watch. Like, I'll probably have to start cutting this stuff out because it just makes the videos too long. But I left it in because I think it demonstrates how important, like, even the less exciting stuff is. If I feel like he still has a lot of energy to get out, or he's just not focused on me, I'm not gonna lope him right away. I want him to be really listening to me, ideally kind of tired, because the lope is still a bit anxiety provoking for him. I feel like he's still I feel like he gets a little bit anxious about how to carry me on his back at the lope. And that's been true with the other two young horses I've worked with. So I want them nice and calm and focused before I ask for the lope. And just depending on the day, that might take 5 minutes of trotting, that might take 15 minutes of trotting, or 45 minutes of trotting spread out throughout your ride. So it's a fluid, dynamic process, and I'm always just kind of keying into what I feel like the horse needs in the moment. This loping session was different than my others because he had a lot more energy. He doesn't look like he's going that fast, but he definitely felt like he was going faster than in the past. So contrary to my previous rides, in this case, when in this case, I wait until he settles down and kind of relaxes into the lope before I reward him. And by reward him, I mean let him break down to a trot, because that's like the easier thing to do. So I loped for quite a while because he didn't feel like he was relaxing down into the gait until the very end. I still don't let him break to a trot. Like, it's always my decision when we go down to a trot. It's not his decision. But I do want to reward him when he relaxes into a slower, calmer lope. So that's what I'm doing here. Again, I'm not worried about his lead at this point. You can see he's picking up the wrong lead. He's switching leads. I'm not worried about that. We're still just working on the basics of balance and speed control. So we'll worry about the leads later. The only other thing I'll say about this is usually I leave the lope to the end because it's the thing I'm working on most, and you always want to end whatever you want the horse to remember and really take away from the ride. You want to save it for the end, and then you want to reward them right away. So that's why I tend to leave the lope to the end. Although sometimes I'll change it up because I don't want them to like anticipate the ride and kind of like have a lot of anticipatory anxiety about the lope coming at the end. So sometimes I'll lope and then I'll do some more trotting, but in general, the rule of thumb is do what you want them to remember most at the end. It'll stick with them better. Let's see, there was one more thing I wanted to say about this. Usually after I finish my ride, I'll let him come down to a walk or whatever, let him stop, and then I get off and cool them down by walking them myself. That's kind of their reward is, and it kind of lets them like turn off their brain. So that's usually how I end my ride. All right, so I asked him to come down to a trot because I felt like he had relaxed by the end of that loping, and that is it for ride 8.